All right, so today we're talking about inductive arguments. And this is, like I said, one of the harder assignments. The first portion of it is not super hard, but it gets progressively harder. Let's see, I'll put myself down here in a corner. Okay, so, oops, that's the wrong screen. Why is that not up? There we go. All right. Um, there we go. Okay, so the first few questions here are all just about identifying universal, non-universal, and specific claims. So all apples are red. Uh, this has an all quantifier, right? It's got a universal quantifier, which should tell us that we're talking about everything in the apple category, right? What that means is this is applying to everything that's an apple. It's saying it's ascribing this property, being red, to everything that is an apple. So anytime you see all or every or any, 100% of, that is a universal, a quantifier that signals that you have a universal claim on your hands. Some, though, is a non-universal quantifier. It tells us that we're only talking about a portion of the cats that exist. So that makes this whole statement a non-universal claim. John is a plumber. That's about a specific guy, right? It's about one guy, an individual. And so it is a specific claim. It does not have a quantifier, right? All bananas are rich in potassium. This is a universal claim. Again, we've got an all here. All right. And I also wanted you to distinguish between um, uh, causal claims and non-causal claims. So saying Grant was a capable general, though he struggled with alcoholism all his life, this is not a causal claim. It's not saying that him struggling with alcoholism made him a capable general, or that his being a capable general made him struggle with alcohol. These are just two different facts about him, claims we're making about him. So there's a very big difference between making what you might call a constitutional claim, a claim about what something is, as opposed to a causal claim, which is a claim about that one thing causes another, that without this one thing, you wouldn't get this other thing. Question 6 is also non-causal. So we've got the crew of the lunar lander had to navigate the Sea of Tranquility on their first journey to the moon. This is not telling us what caused them to do that or what they're doing that caused, right? For a causal claim, you should always be able to identify an X and a Y where X causes Y. And here we've just got a description of what happened for the lunar lander and the crew. Question 7. This is a causal claim. So aphids undermine the physical health of plants. How do they do that? By sucking out the chlorophyll. So the sucking out the chlorophyll here is the X, and that causes Y, which is the physical health of plants being undermined. Seagulls are highly sociable because congregating together is the most optimal feeding pattern. This is claiming that the fact that congregating together is the most optimal feeding pattern for scavenging birds is the cause of seagulls being highly sociable. Right, so this is a causal claim. And when professors give inadequate time for their students to complete tests, this negatively impacts student performance. The X here that causes Y is the professors giving inadequate time. And the Y that is being produced is student performance going down. All right. Now, question 10 on is where this assignment gets a little trickier. I've got a few extra tricks in addition to what I covered in the lecture that I think may help you understand the distinctions between these 5 different types of inductive arguments. Maybe I should spend 1 second just situating inductive arguments in the context of what we've talked about already in this class. So The first lecture was all about basic introduction to reasoning. What are like the basic components of reasoning? What are some of the important concepts? The second lecture was all about deductive reasoning. So sometimes when people make arguments, they are intending for their argument to provide guaranteed support for their conclusion, right? For the premises to provide support such that if they're true, they guarantee the truth of the conclusion. That's not always the case, though. So that makes it really important when people are trying to do that to be able to assess whether an argument is valid or not, whether it's sound. But a lot of times, I would say even maybe the majority of times when people are making an argument, it's not a deductively valid argument. It's not intended to be. A lot of times people are making inductive arguments, arguments that are intended to make their conclusions more probable enough to be believed, even though the premises don't logically guarantee the truth of the conclusion. So that's the case with all five of these argument forms. And I covered in the lecture some of the things that make these good or bad, um, and the basic structure of them. But I've got another important thing I'll share as we go on. So let's start with 10. So Mafalda's web page probably has spelling mistakes. That's the conclusion here. After all, that's the premise indicator. Almost all web pages have them. Well, anytime you're starting in the premises with a claim about some category, right? We're making a non-universal claim about some category, in this case, web pages, right? And then we say this thing is in that category. And then we conclude by saying this thing, therefore, has the same feature as the rest of the things in that category. That's always going to be a statistical syllogism. So statistical syllogisms start out in the premises from some big category and then draw a conclusion about a smaller category or an individual that's contained within that big category. So the broad structure of a statistical syllogism looks like this over here in the top right. The premises are about this big category, and the conclusion is about some smaller category that the premises contain, right? We know this fact about the big premises, so this would be all web pages or almost all web pages, right? Having spelling mistakes. Well, Mafalda's web page is within that group. It's a smaller thing, right? It's not all web pages, it's just one of them. And we're drawing a conclusion that Mafalda's web page probably has the same feature that all the rest of them have, right? Because it's in this group. So we start out in the premises from a big group, draw a conclusion about a smaller one. So that's why this one is a statistical syllogism. Some of you guys said enumerative induction or generalization. Oh, Abigail's asking, is this page available on Brightspace? It should be. So your equivalent page should be available. I believe you can access it by looking at your grade book, and you should be able to look at the grade that you got for this assignment. So tell me if you're unable to view it, and I can check the settings to make sure it's set right. But oh, the chart you just showed. Oh, good. Okay, good question. That's a good question. Maybe I will put it there. Hold on. I think that would be a really good idea because I don't think I have it on Brightspace. Okay, so module 3, inductive arguments. Let's upload a file. And inductive argument types. Yeah, there you go. No problem. I think that's a great idea, Abigail. Thank you. Okay, so so a few of you guys said enumerative induction or generalization for this one. It's important to see, and I'm going to stress this a bunch of times because it's a very common error. It's very easy to make. Generalization and enumerative induction have the opposite group structure compared with a statistical syllogism, right? So if I bring that thing back up, let's see here. So for both enumerative induction and generalization, we have a premise that's about a small group and a conclusion that's about the bigger group, right? That contains it. So that's the exact opposite of statistical syllogism. So if this had been an enumerative induction or a generalization, the premises would have been about Mafalda's webpage, and the conclusion would be about web pages in general. But that's not the direction of this argument, right? This, after all, tells us that almost all web pages have them as a premise. So the big group is in the premises, the small group, or in this case, an individual, is in the conclusion. So again, enumerative induction, generalization, those start with the small group, start with the little sample of some bigger group, and then draw a conclusion about that bigger group, right? And statistical syllogism goes the other direction. Starts big, goes small, right? That's one way to just like think of it as like uh, a real like quick and dirty way to think of it is enumerative induction and generalization starts small and gets big. Statistical syllogism starts big, gets small. Okay, question 11. So the conclusion here is that there will soon be a recovery. Now, the reason to believe that is that uh, most recessions in the past were followed by a period of economic recovery. This is like a feature that recessions have in the past. And we're in a recession now. And so we can expect that the recession we have now will be followed by a recovery. So this is starting with a big group of past recessions or recessions in general. And it's drawing a conclusion about the smaller group, which is this recession, right? That's the structure of a statistical syllogism. Start big, go small. Um, so we're talking in the premises about most recessions, and then we're drawing a conclusion about the current one. Let's see. Here's another important, a few people said analogy for this one. So an analogy is where we have two or more separate things. So the group relations for an analogy are where neither group contains the other, right? So if I was trying to draw an analogy between my cat and my dog, and I was trying to say like both of them, both of them love food or whatever. Both of them love those little churu treats. I don't know if you guys have seen those. So uh, if I wanted to make that claim, I could make it with an analogy. I'd say, well, my dog likes churros, so my cat does too. But notice my dog and my cat are separate individuals. My dog does not contain my cat. My cat does not contain my dog. Compare that with this argument, right? This argument has a premise that's about recessions and then a conclusion about this recession. So this premise contains the thing that we're talking about in the conclusion. And that's the key thing here. Okay. So question 12. This one is a causal argument. Most people got this. Um, the premises say that, we've got diabetes spreading in Asia at the same time as this American style fast food diet is becoming popular. They conclude that fast food diets are responsible for the increased incidence of diabetes. Well, are responsible for is another way of saying causes, right? If you have causal language in in the conclusion that says like this thing causes this thing, right? X causes Y. That's going to be a causal argument. So look for language like that. Are responsible for. I gave you a list, I think, in the lecture of different common causal languages, different kinds of causal language. Another thing to note is this is also not an analogy. So it's not that we're saying that fast food diets are similar to the increased incidence of diabetes, right? Instead, we're saying one thing causes the other. So saying two things are similar is different from saying one causes the other, right? Yet, the argument has to actually be saying these two things are similar to each other somewhere in the argument for it to be an analogy. And, ascribing causation to something is not the same thing as saying it's similar to something else. Question 13. This is a causal argument. So the key language here is was the effect of. This is another way of saying this other thing caused the first thing, right? The current war between crime families caused this guy's shooting. Question 14. Okay, this one is our first analogy that we've encountered here. What this is saying is this is the conclusion that subway service on the red line is going to get better. Now, the reason to believe that is that it is similar to the green line, the blue line, and the orange line. And each in because it's similar in that it's a Boston subway service, right? And because these other lines have this feature, there's better service now on them. We're going to infer on the basis of the red line similarity to these other lines that its service will get better too. So notice if we look at the group structure again, here we actually would have to add a couple more circles, right? Because we got the conclusions about the red line, and then we have premises about the blue line, the orange line. What's the other line? The green line, right? So there'd be three other separate premise circles here. But notice that the red line does not contain the blue line. The blue line does not contain the red line. These are separate, distinct individual things we are assessing, right? That do not contain each other. And that's one reason why you can rule out enumerative induction or statistical syllogism, or for that matter, generalization for this one. The things that the premises and the conclusion are about do not contain each other. There's another important way that you can determine this is not enumerative induction. So a few of you said enumerative induction for this one. And that has to do with the level of statement generality in this conclusion. So recall that, excuse me, recall that enumerative inductions always conclude with a universal statement. They always say everything in this category has this feature, right? So if you identify the conclusion of one of these arguments and you see that it is not a universal claim, instead, this is a specific claim about this particular subway service, right? If you identify that it is not a universal claim in the conclusion, it cannot be an enumerative induction, right? Okay. Excuse me. So, question 15. Hey, everybody got 15. Excellent. Basically, this is arguing that the GOP's new candidate will be applauded by conservatives and rejected by liberals, right? Why? Well, because it's supposed to be similar to President Reagan's conservative program, right? Similar to here is really key. But notice that Reagan's conservative program does not contain the new candidate's conservative program, nor vice versa. So that's another reason why it's an analogy. 16 is a statistical syllogism. This is a kind of classic statistical syllogism. We got most successful politicians have this feature. They are shrewd and practical in their decisions. So this lady's going to be shrewd and practical. That's the conclusion because she's in that category. She's a successful politician. So if this had gone the other direction, it could have been a generalization. If we were saying, hey, look, this lady is shrewd and practical, and she's a successful politician. Suppose those were premises. If those were premises and this was the conclusion that most successful politicians are shrewd and practical, then this would be a generalization. Because then we'd have a sample, just a one person in this case, so not a very good sample, but a sample that we're then drawing a conclusion about, that allows us to draw a conclusion about some broader group, right? So if this were a generalization, the premises would be about this lady, this one successful politician who's shrewd and practical, and the conclusion would be about politicians in general, that the successful ones are shrewd and practical. But in this case, the premises start out with a general claim about successful politicians, and then say, "Hey, this lady, she's in this in that group, right? She's a successful politician, so she probably also has this feature, right? We're For this question, we're reasoning from big to small, right? The big group here is successful politicians. The small group is, in this case, again, an individual, Mayor O'Connell in particular. 17 is also a statistical syllogism, but it's a little different. It's a kind of negative statistical syllogism. So we're saying this guy can't have this feature. So the conclusion is that he can't be a production manager also, right? The premises say he's editor in chief, and 99% of people with these responsibilities can't be production managers. Well, that's the big group here is people with these responsibilities, namely being editor in chief. And the small group that is contained by that big group is Mr. Jackson himself, right? Starting big, going small. Question 18. Okay, so this one is just getting at the distinction between generalization and enumerative induction. As soon as you identify the conclusion here, you should assess what level of statement generality this is. Can anybody tell me what level of statement generality this statement is? 70% of members of the club favor moving to the new facility. Is this a universal claim, non-universal, specific? What do you guys think? Yeah, Abigail says non-universal. That's exactly right, Abigail. So notice when we say 70% of something, we're talking about only a portion of the members of the club. Only a portion of this category is what we're making a claim about. So if this had said 100%, this would be an enumerative induction. But instead, it's a generalization. Remember that generalizations and enumerative inductions have the same group structure. They start small and they get big. But what distinguishes them is the level of statement generality in the conclusion. Is it just making a non-universal claim about that category, or is it making a universal claim? If the latter, it's an enumerative induction. If the former, generalization. So yeah, this is a non-universal claim, and therefore generalization is the right choice here. Question 19. Oh boy, a lot of people miss this one. So I wonder. Yeah, I think it really has to do with just identifying the conclusion and identifying what level of statement generality it is, right? So this is this is a non-universal claim, right? Most. This has a non-universal quantifier, so it's not talking about all major New York law firms. It's just talking about most of them. And this is the conclusion, right? The reason to believe it is that we took this poll and we found that partners were highly paid in most of these firms. So then we're drawing a conclusion about most of the firms in general. So remember, this is still reasoning from small to big, which is the structure of both of these, generalization and enumerative induction. But the conclusion is a non-universal claim. So just look for the quantifiers in the conclusion. Does it say most or many or some or 70% of? Uh, if that's the case, and it reasons from small to big, it is a generalization. If the conclusion is a universal claim, and again, it reasons from small to big, it's going to be an enumerative induction. Um, okay. Now, 20 is an enumerative induction. The conclusion here is that all owls are nocturnal hunters, right? So that means this is a universal claim. And the reason to believe it is that we had all these different observations, right? We took this really huge sample of the population of owls, and we found one universal thing about everything in that sample. They're all nocturnal hunters. So we drew this conclusion that therefore, it's probably all owls have that same feature. Question 21. Since all cases of bipolar disorder studied by neurophysiologists so far include imbalances in brain chemistry, it's likely that all cases of bipolar disorder are cases of chemical imbalance. Again, we've got an all here, right? The conclusion is a universal claim about all cases of bipolar disorder. If this had said most, it'd be a generalization. Question 22. We're starting off with this broad category. Most politicians with academic backgrounds have this feature. They're unable to solve tough, multifaceted problems. Well, our governor is in that category, so it follows that he has this same feature. That's a classic statistical syllogism, reasoning from big to small, right? The big group here is politicians with academic backgrounds. And the smaller thing contained by that group is our governor, right? So that's why enumerative induction and generalization are not the right choice here. The group relations are just not quite right. Question 23 is a kind of weird analogy. It's saying that the conclusion is that the members of the panel on The Voice have lifetime appointments. And the reason to believe that is that they are judges, just like judges are on the Supreme Court, right? Um, so, yeah, this is an analogy. Notice that the members of the Supreme Court do not include any members of the panel on The Voice, and vice versa. These are separate groups that we are alleging to be similar, which is what an analogy does. Question 24 does the same thing. It's comparing and analogizing antelopes to cows. It's saying antelopes are similar to cows in that they are both mammals. And so we're going to draw a conclusion that cows live in the wild because antelopes do, and they're similar to each other in other ways. Notice that there are no cows that are antelopes or antelopes that are cows, right? These groups are separate from each other. They're discrete. Finally, most domestic dogs are animals. Since retrievers are dogs, retrievers are domestic animals. Here we've got the big group, which is dogs. We're reasoning about a smaller group, which is retrievers. Retrievers is contained by the group that is dogs, right? So we're reasoning from big to small here, which is what statistical syllogism does. Okay. So any questions about homework 3? I think as I wait for questions, I'm going to boot up a quizzes game for us to practice on. All right. I'm going to share my screen again. I got a quizzes game going. I've got 10 questions for you. This is not graded, but it's practice. Go ahead and connect here. I'm sharing my screen. Connect here at joinmyquiz.com. Enter code 366912. Or you can use this QR code on the screen. Thank you for joining quickly, Abigail, Ollie, Anessa, Zhuang, and Makai. Just waiting for the rest of the group to get on here. Probably the fastest I've ever run through homework 3. It was that was light speed. Hopefully it made sense. As always, anytime you guys have questions, please feel free to bring them up. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Anybody that's not in already can still join on the fly. The code will appear on the top left of the screen that I'm sharing. All right, first question. You guys are going to get about a minute for each of these. All right. So, uh, the correct answer here is causal argument. The conclusion tells us that free market healthcare systems produce higher prices. So this produce tells us that one of these things causes the other. Having a free market healthcare system causes higher prices compared with single payer systems, right? Um, so the higher prices are being caused by this type of healthcare system, right? That's the key thing here is look for causal language in the conclusion. Anytime you see produce or is responsible for or was the effect of language like that in the conclusion, it's going to be a causal argument. You should be able to identify an X that causes a Y in the conclusion. Okay, next one. Okay, I'm glad we're doing these because it's worth reviewing this. So, the conclusion is about most high school graduates, right? The premise is about a surveyed group of high school graduates. Now, think of which group is bigger, right? Is it the people we surveyed that are high school graduates or high school graduates in general? And I'll tell you, it's the latter, right? So a we have a big group in the conclusion and a smaller group in the premises, right? We start out with a sample of some group of high school graduates. If I bring this back up, here we've got a sample of. We took this longitudinal survey and we studied some people that were high school graduates, and then we're drawing a conclusion about the broader group of high school graduates, that some percentage of them have some feature. In this case, planning to go to college, right? So that's why this is a generalization and not a statistical syllogism. Um, if we wanted to say, if we wanted to make this a statistical syllogism, we would just have to reverse the premises and the conclusion. So if the conclusion was about the sample and the premises were about high school graduates in general, that would make this a statistical syllogism. So it wouldn't be a very interesting argument. And it's usually if you're seeing a sample or a poll, it's going to be a generalization. In some cases, it'll be an enumerative induction, but seldom do you see a sample or a poll mentioned and it's a statistical syllogism. Um, Basically, because that argument would basically be saying, look, we know this fact about high school graduates that most of them plan to go to college. So if you were to take a sample, uh, or if we were speculating on what the sample would be, we would find that, most of the people we would sample, most of the people we would poll or study, would also have that feature if we were studying a smaller group within this big group that we know something about. So that's not what this argument does, though, right? It starts out with this smaller group of high school graduates that we've surveyed, and we found out this fact about them that 76% of them plan to go to college. And then we're drawing a conclusion about high school graduates in general, that most of them plan to go to college. Let's see, a few of you guys said enumerative induction here. Let's look at the level of statement generality in the conclusion, right? This level of statement generality is a non-universal claim. This says most high school graduates. So we're not making a claim about all of them, which is what would be required if this was an enumerative induction. So never answer enumerative induction unless you can identify the conclusion and the conclusion says all the things in this category have this feature, right? Okay, next one. All right, good. A lot of people identified this was an analogy. So this is saying that Iran and Iraq are similar to each other. And it mentions a bunch of different similarities, right? Both countries have majority Shia Muslims. Both have been the victims of international sanctions. Both have had their governments toppled by American intervention. A lot of you guys probably know about what we did in Iraq. You might not know about how we also overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran back in the 50s. Uh, there are reasons why people in Iran are kind of pissed at us, right? Um, so, uh, the similarity that we're talking about in the conclusion relies on this premise, right? That Iraq has substantial oil reserves. So we're going to draw this conclusion that Iran has substantial oil reserves too. And that's because of its supposed similarity with Iraq um, along all these other measures, right? Now, a few of you guys said enumerative induction or statistical syllogism here. One way you can rule out both of those choices is by noticing that Iran and Iraq are two separate countries, right? They neither one contains the other one. And for this to be, excuse me, generalization, enumerative induction, or statistical syllogism, one of these would have to contain the other, right? You would need to have one of them containing the other in order for it to be any of those three, right? So anytime you're comparing separate, discrete individuals where neither contains the other, it's not going to be generalization, enumerative induction, or statistical syllogism, right? Okay, next question. Okay, so this is an enumerative induction. A few of you said generalization. The key thing here, though, is that this is a universal claim. This is the conclusion. It's supported by this survey we took, right? About of hundreds of dog owners, and we found that they all agreed we should vaccinate your dog against rabies. So then we're drawing a conclusion about dog owners in general, and we're making a universal claim about dog owners. That's the key thing that distinguishes enumerative induction from generalization, right? So, a few of you had said statistical syllogism here. Remember the group relationships that are required for statistical syllogism. It needs to be going from big to small. The premises are about some big group, the conclusion's about a smaller one. Here, the premise, which is this claim, is about the surveyed dog owners. And the conclusion is about dog owners in general. Notice that dog owners in general is a bigger group than the group in the premises, right? So this argument is reasoning from small to big. It's starting with a small group, the people we surveyed, and drawing a conclusion about the bigger group, right? The bigger group that contains the group that we surveyed, right? Dog owners in general. This is also not an analogy because what we're not saying is that the group of dog owners in general is similar to the ones we surveyed. Instead, it contains the group that we surveyed, right? Um, so you should not answer analogy if you can recognize that the group in the premises is contained by or contains the group in the conclusion, right? Analogy doesn't have that structure. It's got separate, discrete individuals. Okay, one. Here's the next one. All right. So this one is statistical syllogism. The conclusion is about this one guy, right? Your cousin. The premise is about lawyers in general, right? So we've got this. If we pull up this thing again, the premises are about lawyers in general. The conclusion is about one guy, your cousin, who's contained, right, by that big group. So we're starting in the premises from a big group and drawing a conclusion about a smaller one, right? So a lot of you said generalization. It has the opposite group structure of a generalization, right? Um, if we were going to say, if we were going to make this a generalization, we'd have to reverse what the premise and the conclusion is. If we wanted to say, hey, probably like 70% of lawyers pass the bar on their first try. That's my main claim. That's the thing I'm trying to support. That's my conclusion. And then you ask, like, okay, why do you think that? Suppose I then said, well, look, your cousin, he passed the bar in his first try, right? He's a lawyer. Well, that would be a generalization because the premise would be about this one guy, a kind of sample of the group of lawyers. And then the conclusion would be about lawyers in general, right? But instead, what we're doing is we know this general fact about lawyers that's offered as a premise, and then we're drawing a conclusion about your cousin who is within that group, right? So we're reasoning from big to small. Does this big to small talk make sense to you guys? It's like the simplest way I can put it, but I don't know if it tracks. I think it does, but yeah, it does. Okay, good. At least for Pranima. Good. All right, next one. And Shakir too. Good. Okay. A lot of you guys got that this was analogy, which is great. Now, the key thing here is that this is comparing both the presidents. It's saying one of them is similar to another. Oh, is there a raised hand here? Did somebody intend to do that? That's interesting. It doesn't show me who actually raised their hand. Huh. Um, if anybody has a question, feel free to ask it. But so some people said causal argument here. Um, the conclusion is that Joe Biden will probably consider pardoning Julian Assange. Now, um, this is just it's a non-causal claim about the future, right? So it's important to note that sometimes we make claims about what will happen in the future. That's different from making claims, the claim that this thing will happen in the future because of this other thing, right? That's what would be required for this to be a causal claim in the conclusion. Instead, this is just a non-causal claim, a constitutional kind of claim about what Joe Biden will do, right? Um, and so it is not this is not a causal argument because the conclusion is not a causal claim. Um, yeah, instead, analogy is the better choice here. We're saying that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are both similar in that they seek to shake things up internationally, and that because Donald Trump had this feature, Joe Biden probably will too. Not a very good argument, but uh, okay. Next question. Purnima is saying I'm buffering. Am I breaking up here? Anybody else experiencing that? I don't know if it's Purnima's connection or if it's mine. Usually mine's pretty good. It may be your connection, Purnima, in which case might need to move to a location closer to your router. I'm on a pretty good connection, although it's not impossible for it to go wrong, but I've got a pretty good fiber connection. Great for gaming, you know. uh, okay. The conclusion here is that Dumbo was a successful film. Now, the reason offered for that is that Disney films are usually successful. That's the big group. And Dumbo is a Disney movie. It's in that group. And so we're going to draw a conclusion about Dumbo, that smaller thing within that big group, right? That's the structure of a statistical syllogism. We're starting from the big group, which is Disney movies, and we're reasoning to and drawing a conclusion about a smaller thing within that big group, right? So that's what a statistical syllogism does. Uh, a few of you said causal argument here. So the conclusion is just that Dumbo was successful, but what it does not say is why Dumbo was successful. I mean, if the conclusion had said Dumbo is a Disney movie and that caused it to be successful, then it would be a causal argument. That would be ascribing the fact that it's a Disney movie to that would be the reason why, not just the reason to make you believe this conclusion, but the reason that causes this thing to be the way that it is, right? So there's an important distinction between like making an argument where you provide reasons for somebody to believe that something is a certain way and making an argument where you provide reasons to believe that one thing causes another, right? The latter is a causal argument. The former could be any of these other types of argument. Uh, okay, let's see here. Again, remember we're reasoning from big to small here, and that's why statistical syllogism is the right choice as opposed to generalization. Generalization would be saying, hey, Dumbo was successful, and Dumbo was a Disney film, so probably most Disney films are successful, right? If that was the conclusion that most Disney films are successful, then that would be a generalization. Instead, it's a statistical syllogism. Next one. Okay. Okay, Abigail and Daniel are doing great. Some of you close behind. So, uh, all swans scientists have observed so far are white. So then we're going to draw a conclusion that all swans are white. So this is an enumerative induction. The conclusion is a universal claim, right? That's why this is not just a generalization. A generalization would say most swans are white, or 70% of swans are white, or a lot of swans are white. Um, this makes a claim about all swans. So it's not limited to just a portion of the category. So it's a universal claim. That's how a enumerative induction concludes. It's also not an analogy. So remember that. So what we're not doing is analogizing swans to white things. We're saying swans are white, right? We're not comparing swans to something else. We're instead making just a claim about all swans. The other important thing is that remember, for analogy, you have to separate in distinct groups where neither contains the other. The premises are about a sample of swans that the scientists have observed. And there's presumably other swans out there that are floating around in lakes and stuff, doing swan stuff. And those swans maybe haven't been observed, but the conclusion is about all swans, ones we've observed and the ones we haven't. So this premise is contained, the group in the premise, the swans that scientists have observed, is contained by the group in the conclusion. Again, if this was an analogy, neither group would contain the other. Just a couple more here. Okay, I think this one is a little tricky. Now, the conclusion is that breathing problems are a problem for a majority of bulldogs. The premise says that we did this study and we found that 52% of the bulldogs in the study had breathing problems. So we're starting, notice this argument goes from small to big, which is why it can't be a statistical syllogism, right? It goes from small to big. The small group here is the bulldogs that we studied for this journal, Canine Health. And then the conclusion is talking about the bigger group, which is bulldogs in general, right? So we got this small group. Again, if we look at this is a generalization because the premises are about the group in the study. We found that 52% of them have breathing problems. And then the conclusion is about bulldogs in general. So if this had gone the other direction, if we said, hey, we know that breathing problems are a problem for bulldogs in general, so then we're going to draw this conclusion that if we were to do a study, we'd find that, maybe 52% of them have breathing problems. That would have premises that are about the bigger group and a conclusion that's about the smaller one. That is the sample that we are actually looking at in the journal. Instead, it goes the other direction. We start with the sample and draw a conclusion about the bigger group, right? Reasoning from small to big. This is also not an enumerative induction. The reason for that is this conclusion is just about the majority of bulldogs. It's not about all bulldogs. So this is a non-universal claim in the conclusion, which means this cannot be an enumerative induction. It's also not an analogy, right? We're not analogizing bulldogs to something else. Instead, we're like making a claim about bulldogs in general. The other important thing is that the group in the study is contained by the group in general, like the broader group. No problem, Shakir. So, so this wouldn't be an analogy. Remember, analogies always have separate, distinct groups that we are alleging to be similar, where neither one contains the other. And the group here, bulldogs in the study, is contained by the group in the conclusion, bulldogs in general. All right, one more, guys, and I'm going to let you go for the day. Okay. So this is a causal argument. The reason why this guy had to leave on the first day, the cause of his leaving was that we had all the bears milling around, right? The conclusion is saying the reason why he left, the cause of his leaving, was all these bears. Um, so the X here is all the bears milling around. The Y is him leaving, and that's what shows up in the conclusion. Okay. Remember also for analogy, you have to be saying one thing is similar to another thing. So you should never answer analogy unless you know, like, okay, this is the thing that it's alleging to be similar to this other thing. You got to identify those two things and identify what similarity the argument is alleging between them. There's no like similarity being alleged here. Instead, we're making a causal claim about what happened to this guy. Um, I think one person answered enumerative induction. I wonder if that's because you saw the all here. Um, just the presence of a quantifier like all does not guarantee that something is going to be an enumerative induction. Um, the claim, an enumerative induction says in the conclusion, everything in this category has this feature. It's a universal claim. This argument, the conclusion is not actually a universal claim here. Um, Instead, we're talking about uh, the all the bears milling around were the cause of his leaving. So we're not making a claim about like a universal claim about bears or even a universal claim about like what about the bears that were milling around his campsite. Instead, what we're doing is saying that that group of bears caused something, right? Which is a little different. Okay. Let's see how everybody did at the end here. Daniel, Abigail, and Mackay, very well done. Okay. So if you guys were struggling with this one, if it was difficult, remember we also have we've got the makeup. We've also got extra inductive argument practice under practice and supplementary materials. We will probably go over this at some point again before the midterm. Maybe I'll give you a few more questions, but yeah, that's the plan. We're definitely going to go over it before we do the final. Uh, for next time, you guys have abductive arguments. So this next assignment is, I will be honest with you, probably too easy. And our meeting for tomorrow will probably be pretty short. But it may be nice for you guys to get a little bit of a break after the intensity of the last few days. So um, I think that should be fine. But yeah, anticipate tomorrow we're probably going to be shorter and the assignment shouldn't be super hard. We will pick back up with some fairly hard assignments when we get into the fallacies, which is module 5. And that's spread out over 2 days, kind of like the deductive reasoning section was, because it's an extra long lecture. All right, guys, let's go ahead and conclude there for the day. Thanks for joining me today, and I will see you guys tomorrow for our last day of our first full week.
Thank you, Professor.